So we are now 2 weeks into the NFL season, and Packers rookie first-round wide receiver, the first-round wide receiver they drafted in a very long time, he has not been very productive when you look at the stat sheet. 2 receptions and 16 yards in his first 2 games. And if you hadn't, looked at anything else, all you did was look at that and say 2 receptions, 16 yards in 2 weeks after all of the hype that came out at training camp, all of the news from reporters and different clips floating around of him just beating guys all the time, you'd say, like, what's going wrong here? But I think the reality is that Jordan Love just has not looked Matthew Golden's way a lot. It has nothing to do with Matthew Golden not being consistently open. And I came across some very interesting stats earlier today. First off, here we have from Scott Barrett on X. He shared the current wide receiver leaders in average separation score per fantasy points data, and they have people who track the receivers and give them a separation score, basically, how good they are at separating, getting open. And guess who the number one guy in the entire NFL is at average separation score? Matthew Golden at 0.4. You do have Romeo Doubs at number 4 at 4 overall, but Matthew Golden is number 1 there. And then one other stat I shared on X earlier today, I said the Packers are loaded at wide receiver. They have 3 wide receivers that rank in the top 11 in route win rate percentage through 2 weeks per fantasy points data, minimum 10 routes. Romeo Doubs 5th, Dontavian Wicks 7th, Matthew Golden 11th. And I also came across someone who had put together a compilation on Twitter of just every single Matthew Golden route, and I was watching it, and he is open consistently. So the reason that he has 2 receptions, 16 yards has nothing to do with him, not being able to get open. I think that he has gotten open at one of the highest rates in the NFL, and I think that just shows you that Jordan Love is not afraid to spread the ball around, and the Packers, because they have a lot of depth and lots of different players that Jordan Love trusts, that leads to someone being open at one of the higher rates and Jordan Love just not looking his way very often. And you, of course, have 2 of those plays in last week's game where, one, Golden beats his guys deep and Jordan Love just doesn't put enough on the ball. If Jordan Love on that play specifically had thrown a perfect ball, then Golden would have had potentially a touchdown on that play for, I don't know how, it was a super long play. So he should have had more production statistically if Love threw a couple better balls. But I think the good sign is that he is getting open at one of the highest rates in the NFL. But when we look at the Packers and their receivers, more data here from Fantasy Points. So if you look at first read percentage, so what percentage of the time is Jordan Love looking at each of these players as the first read? It's very spread out. You have Romeo Doubs, number 1, at 20.6%, Dontavian Wicks, 17.6%, Tucker Kraft, 17.6%, Jaden Reed, 11.8%, and then Matthew Golden, 8.8%. So he's currently 5th on the first read percentage. And of course, with Jaden Reed gone, I assume that Matthew Golden will get more looks than he had been getting. But when you have Doubs playing well, Wicks playing well, Kraft playing incredible, that just leads to the production being spread out a ton, which has been the case in Green Bay for the past couple seasons, which I think is why a lot of people don't have a ton of confidence in the Packers receivers. I know that just a lot of people have been saying, some from other, fan bases, lots of different people, talking about the Packers not having any, number 1 wide receivers. I really just don't think that's the reality. I think they have a lot of guys who, if they were the only guy here at that talent level and you had some other lower tier guys who didn't win a large number of their routes, I think that someone like Romeo Doubs, if he got, if you doubled his first read percentage, I think he'd have, a much higher statistical output. And so that's just the reality. When you have someone who loves to spread the ball around like Jordan Love, it leads to guys, statistically, their production, being a lot different week by week, and it has no, it does not show any, or it's not proving that Matthew Golden does not, play good football the first 2 weeks. He's played very, very good football. And so I think that we'll likely see Golden get more production as time goes by, just because, he gets open at such a high rate. And the more looks he gets, then that just means that, Doubs, Wicks, Kraft get less looks. So it will be interesting to see if the rate that Jordan Love targets each of these players continues throughout the season, or depending on matchup, it may shift and change. And I think come late in the season, we'll sort of see the whole picture, because 2 weeks in, very dependent on, matchups. And I know that teams have been playing a really high rate of man on the Packers, and Maybe when other teams play more zone, maybe that shifts who, Jordan Love targets and where he looks and things like that. And Brian Gutekunst had said in a press conference sometime in the past year, I think it was maybe right after the season potentially, but he had basically talked about how when you look at some of the most successful teams in the NFL, a lot of times they don't have a one guy that's getting the massive amount of targets. A lot of teams that are successful do spread the ball out a lot, and that seems to be the formula the Packers are going with here in Green Bay. But those are my thoughts on Matthew Golden. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below. You can also follow me on Twitter at LukeBeller3. But I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you guys next time.